During this screencast, we'll be looking into my mock-up for League of Legends, the PC game, with the main focus being on the Champions page and its UI that we've redesigned. So, initially, we're going to quickly go through our redesign checklist, as the older version had some key flaws that we tried to tackle during this redesign, yet also had key elements that we adapted into the new UI, as they were strong enough on their own. The aims behind the redesign were to combine all these separate UIs that you can see into a single space in order to reduce the clutter, and to reorganize the layouts to its key elements to help reduce the empty space, which was taken up by a lot of the previous design, like you can see within this area here and within this area here. We took inspiration from Dota 2 and the mobile version of League of Legends Wild Rift, taking its 3D model alternatives in place of splash arts, the accessibility to guides, which weren't normally a part of League. However, Wild Rift included an items section that allowed players to see what items were commonly built with their champions, while Dota provided a actual guide page showing players which abilities to take, which items to build, and how to play each champion. Other than that, we also included the skins, which would now take place over the backgrounds. This was a combination of League's pre-existing design, like this, where the splash art is the majority of the background, and over here where the skin is also present, and Wild Rift's alternative design that had the 3D model as the background for the backdrop, where all the UI would sit on top of. So we would aim to use these skins to represent whichever part of the background needed it, where if a player selected a skin, that would be the background at that moment. We also needed to adapt these layouts as well. Dota 2 is also a PC game, Wild Rift on the other hand is on a mobile, so some of the elements that we got, like the skins, originally you would swipe to choose between them, but you can't do that on PC, so we had to add separate elements in order to swap between the skins, which I think we just went with the original League of Legends arrows to make up for that fact. And by adapting these layouts, we would hope to increase the quality of life aspects, which was the main aim of this project. Additionally, we would want to stay consistent with the style, as branching out would make these pages look too different from the actual client itself, which would go against what we're after. Starting with the mock-up, these were the first areas that we attempted to include, and were the main areas that we wanted to include throughout. So there was the bio, which is a basic overview of the champion's backstory, the highlights, which included how difficult champion was to play, the addition of a lane, because each champ has its own specialised lane it's made for, and the role that they play. After that, we moved on to the abilities, which we added a new section of the UI to help further enhance its understandability. We added the skins back here, similar to how the mobile version did. We have the stats here, which got changed in the second mockup. And we have the Eternals, the splash arts or models, depending on which one is toggled at the time, the 2D and 3D option, and we have the mastery points for that champion that is currently selected. So, moving on to the initial layout, this is what we'd come up with. I didn't want to try and overcrowd this area, as I'd originally split the page in two to stop these elements clashing, and to be able to give each area its own section where it could be represented. So that became a key issue moving on, as especially with the graph, it felt like it was too out of place, or like if I tried to move it anywhere like here or here, it would feel too cluttered and it would make everything else way too squished together. So with these sides, we had the left side, which would provide all the information that the player would require, and the right side, which would give visual representations of these elements, trying to complement each other. So the bio is the first part of the left hand side, which is the basic champion introduction, and the highlights are once again the basic elements that the player must understand for that champion. So the role and the difficulty could be found within the original client, but this lane option is a new thing that I added to give players further help and understanding of how champions work, as with each lane, certain champions and certain types like bruisers or tanks tend to go top lane, whereas rangers or marksmen tend to go bot lane, which is a common understanding within the game. But tying these two together further just helps newer players get that understanding. Next is the abilities. So in the original design we had the graph sitting here, but in the final design we decided that I decided that I wanted to include the video next to it in a smaller but focused area, unlike the original, which had the entire background being the video. This is a small condensed version that focuses on the key elements for each ability, not wasting any time for either. This way we wouldn't have any repercussions and we could keep the entire layout concise and packed together without really overcrowding it. So these visual aids were mostly here to highlight the abilities on the page. So as you can see here, whenever you clicked on one, the ability and the video would now change, but whenever you clicked on these little icons here, the diamond beneath them would glow gold to represent which ability is actually being represented. It's just like a further, more like visual representation, again to help newer players and to increase the quality of life. In order to limit any confusion that might have cropped up, because some players might have clicked on like this ability and thought it was this, but with just this extra little addition, it makes it much more clearer. So our skins, splash arts and models that we tried to include, we took all the skins from the original PC version, as they were already there and present, so we wouldn't have to change anything outside of the UI. But we took the layouts from Wild Rift and League of Legends, trying to merge aspects of both into this newer sort of mangled together form. So instead of having a swipeable option, we had these arrows like in the original that would then filter between each skin. Or as an extra thing, if you would just click on one of these skins, that would then be the skin highlighted and it would move over here. Or if you click on this one, it would move over here, and that would be the main focus. And once again, whenever you would click on one of these, or you would move over to it, the splash art or model that was currently there would be replaced over a matter of seconds with the currently selected one. So this here is the pool party one, which is right over here. Just once again to provide another visual representation, with the model specifically giving the players the chance to see the model before purchasing, and to see the model outside of the game so they knew what it looked like, as it sometimes can be really difficult to just see the finer details on each skin. But we wanted to include a key element from the Wild Rift, where you could, in Wild Rift and Dota 2, you could spin the model. So I wanted to include that and let you be able to drag the model, because Wild Rift you would just swipe it with your finger, but in Dota 2 you could drag it, which worked really well for the PC versions. The Eternals were like a huge issue in the first design, I believed, where they took up half of the page of the original UI and left this section that had the actual featured Eternals in its own smaller corner, whereas this featured Eternals section should have been the main drive and the main focus of that page. So I decided to stay consistent and use a similar method to the skins, using these arrow keys to swap between the groups of Eternals. So this is the standard group of Eternals. I think it's Eternals 1, it might be Eternals 2, but it would essentially be an area where the Eternals could be shown. There was an option which didn't make it into the design where there would be a drop-down menu in order to select these skins, but instead we want to stay consistent and use these arrows to swap between groups. And with this we also included the stats graph just above, as this area is the main focus for most people, as the visuals are very appealing and they're very eye-catching, so this is where most players tend to look. And while we wanted the graph to stay close to the abilities originally, as they really helped provide more details into how the character actually plays, adding it here shows another area where it can aid those newer players into understanding the champion better without really subtracting away from its needs, still giving it the attention that it should garner for them without having to make the other area feel overcrowded, but also not hinder the overall design. The 2D and 3D model options and the mastery were shown in this right hand side as well, with the 2D and 3D option being a hybrid of the Wild Rift and Dota 2's, as both were successful. But with this version, I feel like I didn't spend enough time really trying to knuckle down on it. I wanted to make it transparent so that you could still see through it, but not so much that you wouldn't be able to notice that it is a button that is toggleable, which took inspiration from Wild Rift's version, but it does look out of place when you get these closer views. So maybe in a possible redesign again, these elements could be enhanced, maybe copying how the Eternals have this ring, which could have been a much better design choice. But other than that, I'd say that the 2D and 3D implementation was really successful, and I was really proud of how it turned out. The mastery points are shown at the top of the page, spread out from the normal area where all of the other key details were shown, because this by itself should garner enough interest without really affecting anything. And thanks to it being spread out enough, when attention is drawn to it, it doesn't overcrowd or it doesn't distract too heavily, but it's still there and it still provides the main attraction, showing off your mastery over this champion, with the example provided being the highest that you can get. And having it there alongside the stats graph and the 2 to 3D model or splash art option sort of breaks it up a little bit, not making it seem too overbearing. And with these changes, I do believe that the redesign so far has provided much greater benefits than the original, and it has definitely cut down on the amount of sub-pages or sub-categories that you needed in order to reach certain elements, which is a great quality of life improvement. The example interaction that I wanted to present was the abilities that I'd covered earlier, with the Q ability, like being selected, changing not only the video but also the section here, which gives you a rough basis for what the ability does. But now we have also changed the skin from here over to this pool party version, so what would now happen is, while this is going on, this section would now have to change, and in this new design it has. So now the splash art for the pool party skin is covering this area instead of the base skin, and you can see there much clearer on this side that that little diamond is golden, once again showing the visual aid. As you can see here, we're about to move on to the newer element that was included. So with our final adaptation of this piece, we wanted to go over what shaped the UI last. So in both Dota 2 and Wild Rift, there was this amazing element that allowed players to have access to common built items or guides on how abilities worked, or just guides in general towards the playstyles of each champion or character. So I wanted to do a similar thing within this design, adding the area there, which doesn't really hinder the design, actually sort of fills up a blank space that just sort of was doing nothing, with two useful abilities, which are the runes and the items buttons. Two buttons that would take you to the rune page and the items page respectively, which is a separate UI, so it won't be covered with this. However, similar to Dota 2's guide page and similar to Wild Rift's item, like commonly built items page, it will just provide a simple basic thing going along with those elements, but within the new client. And with this, it sort of enhances further the changes made to really knuckle down and increase the quality of life for not only its players but its visuals and everything that goes into these elements.